I'm going to try to put some thoughts into concrete here today. Um, the topic of today's discussion is the use of philosophy and the use of science, and how every person intertwines these two things in some ratio to justify their view of the world. I watched this Alex O'Connor video recently, and he explains how philosophy is kind of an aesthetic endeavor. He explained how if you read Nietzsche and Nietzsche already didn't resonate with you, it's probably not going to make a whole lot of sense to you in the long run. Even if you're very intelligent and you can parse difficult to understand things, it's about the emotional resonance that really gives it weight to a person. And I think that's very accurate. I think that philosophy is often used as a method to justify how we already feel about this wacky universe we live in. And the way we feel can be justified by going back to our presuppositions. So these are the things that we look at in the universe, right, and we just assume are true. Nobody cannot assume something is true unless they are a solipsist, right? Unless they believe that they are the only mind, the only perception in the universe, and that the entirety of the universe comprises only what they can directly see and observe. That's called solipsism, and it is a non-functional philosophy because you can't actually follow solipsism unless you're psychotic, right? It's an inherently socially damaging way to look at the world, because if you believe that you're the only conscious mind, if you're the only sentience, and that you're the main character of the universe, then you can't then act in a moral way justified by your philosophical belief that you are the main character of the universe, right? There's no reason not to go and murder people because you don't believe that consequences exist, right? Many people these days have a presupposition of anthropocentrism. And since I was quite young, I have found myself to be in the opposite philosophical aesthetic preference. And here, we'll take a walk down this way. We'll take a walk on my path so I can stop fucking running around going crazy wacky places. Excuse me. So the presupposition, right, is that what I feel like maybe the majority of people have. They have this presupposition that the universe was kind of made for them. It's called anthropocentrism. And I've been opposed to that for my entire life. And I was never really sure why until I started digging in to why that didn't feel quite right to me. What people do with this presupposition that human beings are special, divinely unique, or specially important in our universe is they make conclusions about the natural world from that starting point. So the classic example is something called tag. It's the something argument for God, transcendental argument for God. And it basically argues that because morality and logic exist in our universe, that there must have been some kind of logic giver, right? There's some kind of arbiter of logic that exists outside of space and time that facilitates the concepts of logic and morality. In that view, people make conclusions about the natural world that wouldn't follow if you didn't assume those things. There is a flaw in that assumption, and it's that it makes an extra assumption that's embedded in it. It assumes that human beings are divinely important, unique, or special, which may or may not be true. But if we want to sort of get away from just looking at the universe in philosophy in a pardon me, if we want to get away from looking at the universe in an aesthetic way, we need to accept that that is an additional assumption we're making about the universe. The opposite is what I've called non-exceptionalism. I don't know if that term has been coined before, and it's almost certainly had a different name, but the basic idea is that no, humans are not divinely important or special. And what's helpful about this is that we can make better assumptions. We can grasp information about the universe with a simpler set of assumptions. So for example, we see data out there in nature that organisms evolved, right? Once upon a time, there were fish swimming in the sea, and we went from that just through nature to where we are now, where I am a primate man playing Minecraft. In the anthropocentric view, you have to in some way deny or tinker with this concept, despite the fact that it's obviously true. And in this way, you are denying reality, essentially. You're putting your presupposition ahead of what is actually out there. How I feel is that we can shave off a lot of those assumptions by starting as simply as possible. So you've probably heard of Rene Descartes, and this is where it starts getting into my own personal philosophy. But to be clear, I'm not a philosopher. I am a thinker, and I'm bad at it. But it starts with Rene Descartes. The basic principle that he espoused is that you can only really know for sure one thing about the universe. And I find this to be incontrovertible. You can only really know that something exists. Not you specifically, not your mind or your consciousness, but every time you think, or you perceive, or you experience being, you are proving, without a shadow of a doubt, that something exists. Whether it's actually you, or actually you in tandem with a broader universe, you're proving that something exists. I'm personally convinced, and this is my one assumption about reality, I'm personally convinced that the consistency I observe in nature, in the consistency of my manner of observation, the fact that I get up every day and the laws of physics seem the same, the sun rises, the sun sets, the fact that it's always the same, sort of like clockwork, indicates to me that either my perception is tuned in such a way to appreciate that consistency, or it's actually consistent. And that is my one philosophical deduction that I make. It's the one assumption I make about the world. I don't need any further assumptions. It comes packaged a little bit. So it basically goes like, the outside universe exists, and it has consistent natural properties. I have good reason to believe that the properties are consistent, because it's sort of illogical to suppose that nature doesn't have consistent properties. It kind of goes like this, right? Anything that occurs in nature has an effect on something in nature. So theoretically, we'd be able to measure that effect. If the supernatural, quote unquote, exists, then what it does is produce effects in our universe that can't be measured, or that are simply part of a broader nature. So I don't actually deny that God could exist outside of space and time, but it's not supernatural. I call it paranature. So it's something above and beyond our natural world, but it's still within the confines of a singular natural world. Because how could it not be? How could things not cause things to happen? What this worldview also enables me to do is to accept what nature looks like and how it behaves. We don't take it on faith that we evolved, or that we evolve, the organisms evolve. Because that is the pattern indicated by nature, by the natural world. When we actually look at the data and we look at how things interact and we look at the robustness of our models, we know, at least if the universe has consistent behavior, that this is the way things actually are. That the universe actually facilitates the evolution of life forms, and that we actually evolved. The hurdle here is that this way of looking at the world is sort of devoid of a why. It's where most people start with their philosophy. They start with an aesthetic preference for the why of everything. So, I believe in God because I want to exist with purpose, and I want to believe that my spirit will carry on. That's a why. Why are you here? Your philosophy can tell you why. But my philosophy, this natural monism, only explains how things are. Why, to me, is sort of an irrelevant question. Because the only things I can actually interact with and understand are here within that singular nature. And its behavior is the only thing that I can the only thing I can perceive to tell me things about nature and how it operates. And I think that's okay. I'm fine with that, frankly. I accept, like, the other side, right? The Christian fundamentalists, the pre-suppers in those, that group. I'll call them hostile evangelicals, because religious people are fine. I don't actually have a problem with them. They just start with different presuppositions than me. But when they claim that they operate under fewer assumptions than me, that's when I start having a problem, because they just factually don't. I just know what I see. And how could you know things other than what you see, really? I lost my train of thought there. Point being, I don't have a problem with not having a specific why, because I have this whole universe to sort of play around with and be in. It doesn't matter to me much why I'm here, because I can derive enjoyment and satisfaction from this universe. I believe that's by my virtue of being an organism, being an ego, which has separated itself from the rest of the universe. But I don't actually believe I'm separate from it, because how could I be? I was wrought from my my being, my perception, my experience of being was wrought from this natural world, just like every other thing. In other words, my experience of reality is not an exceptional trait. It doesn't break any rules or laws. It's incredibly unusual, perhaps, but we don't even know that. And I'm okay also with the fact that one day this bubble that I'm in, this experience of reality, is just going to pop. I'm going to die. And I'm okay with that. And I genuinely struggle to understand why so many people have a problem with that. Because it's like, I don't understand why you can't just enjoy the ride. Right? The fact that it's temporary, the fact that we exist as these ephemeral bodies, these entities that are cut off from the rest of the universe, why is it more poetic or emotionally satisfying to remain in some form or another? Not in a supernatural state, because, as I've explained, that's logically impossible. Even for Christians, it's logically impossible, because God is just another part of nature, as I've described. I think it most certainly has something to do with human psychology, and it certainly has something to do with upbringing, because I do understand on a level, and I'm not saying I don't love my family, but if you are raised in an environment where there's a lot of love and care and such, then in other words, if you live a life that's like really good and you enjoy it, you might be tempted to just not want it to ever end. Whereas I personally have gone through some suffering in my life, mostly emotional, I'll admit. And so I don't really see a problem with the return to form, right? The return to the void, as it were, wherein this experience just goes away. And while I'm derived of the pleasures and satisfaction of life, I'm also deprived, of the suffering in life. I find peace in that. So as I was saying, if you're like me, you don't need a why. You're only interested in how. Because the why is self-evident by observing the how. Why should you be? Because you are. And this is it. So why not be? That's really all. Bye-bye.